Hi, I'm Erin Sarofsky.
And I'm Austin Shaw.
This is Between the Keyframes. Episode 32, interview with Kelli Anderson.
What's up, everybody? We're here with Kelli Anderson. Super excited to get to chat and to learn some more about Kelli. And recently Kelli did a workshop with the students at Western Washington University. It was super fun. Students were engaged basically from the start, like right from the get-go, all the way through a 2-day workshop, and it was really fun. It was a great end of the year celebration. So just to get a chance to chat with you some more. We're really excited for that. So welcome.
Thanks for having me.
Absolutely. And just to get things started, because I think you're a very interesting person, and I don't know if you would necessarily call yourself like a motion designer, right? Like a traditional motion designer, but you do a lot of motion work. But you seem like a really eclectic, creative person, right? And then you kind of work between fine art and commercial art and design work and education, professional practice, all of it, right? And I know you've like spoken at the Blend Festival, so I know like at the minimum you're at least motion adjacent. But I don't know, would you consider yourself a motion designer, or how do you even describe yourself?
Yeah, I mean, I guess there's a couple different things that I do, but motion design is part of it, and I accidentally became a motion designer as much as that's possible, because I had constructed. I was working on all of the illustrations for an app for my friends at Tiny Bob. There were illustrations of 265 parts of the human body, and I thought, like, what would be a fun gift to give my friends but to cut out all of these body parts and make like this giant, like, child-sized paper corpse. And so I did that, and then as soon as this thing was on my desk, I was like, well, it needs it needs to be animated. Like, it needs to eat pizza, it needs to pump blood through its veins. And so I started trying my hand at stop motion. I don't know if it's arrogance or what, but I figure if someone else has done it before, then I can figure it out. And so I had seen that other people had done stop motion. And so I shot a stop motion of this, and it was very popular. It ended up on like Radio Lab and like all over the place. And so, and I had a lot of fun doing it. Like, it didn't feel like work because it really wasn't. In the future, it kind of felt like work. Once people start hiring you to do anything, for some reason it becomes less fun. But I I don't know why. It's like a law of physics. But yeah, so I started doing animation that way, and recently, like these past few years, kind of like whatever technology I have access to. I'm like very curious about technology. I gained access to a Riso printer. So I have my paper cutter, which has been kind of unloved. The new piece of technology is the Riso printer. And I came up with this technique where I would do animation on the Riso. And that's really taken off and kind of become like a worldwide phenomenon. And so every month we teach a Riso animation workshop. Yeah, so that's kind of my experience with animation. I haven't ever taken a class. Maybe I should.
Maybe you shouldn't. I think like
Yeah.
that naivety is what is awesome about this. And I think so many people think of technology as a barrier, but it's not. You just got to get started. You just got to start making the thing. And usually, like, not knowing how to do it um, creates a process that adds to the whole motion vocabulary in a way. It's kind of cool, because then what happens is a company like mine will get that as a reference, and we'll try and figure out a way to do that in a procedural way, which means that a client can add comments and things along the way, and we're not going back to square one and reprinting and doing all of that kind of stuff. So it really does, it evolves everything in a really beautiful way.
Yeah, I think you really just have to embrace the idea of, like, being okay with using technology the wrong way and just
Totally.
kind of being like, this is my style. Like, this is my artistic style. It's not that I don't know how to use the Rezo or, but yeah, if you really don't care what a thing is supposed to be used for and just develop your own way, that's a very efficient route to having a unique style.
I love that. Kelly, tell us about your background.
And I think maybe even just to go a step back too. I mean, I'm real curious just to hear. I know we talked a little bit about your background, but maybe just going, yeah, like where you got started and what were some of your
Mhm.
early interests, maybe even before college. Like, yeah, what was your artistic drives?
Totally.
Yeah, well, I've always really been interested in both art and science, art and technology. So in high school, and I have like the most boring bio as an art kid. Also, like I was in the talent art classes when I was a little tiny kid, and then when I was in high school, I went to an arts magnet high school. Then when I got into college, I studied studio art, and so it's kind of like the most predictable biography you can ever imagine. But um, when I was in high school, most of my work was doing paintings of kind of like absurdist, surrealist math problems, like two hamsters divided by carrot equals toast or something. Like so. I was always kind of like combining this like analytical, scientific way of thinking with absurdity and things that typically don't belong there. But um I think that in my professional life, I went to grad school for studio art and for art history, and but all
Nice.
the while I was being hired by friends who had bands or cable access TV shows or production companies, and they were like, "Oh, Kelly should do the visuals for this." And it was only after I graduated with 2 degrees not in design that I realized that, oh, I'm a designer. And so I think that I began embracing that after grad school, that I was a designer, and then started doing like more client work and products. It just never really appealed to me, the idea of being a fine artist having to kind of like hide in my studio for half the year and work on a body of
Mhm.
work and then only emerge to have a gallery show. The pacing of a designer's life is more fun because it feels more like kind of like a tinkering, like give and take with the external
Yeah.
world, rather than just coming out dramatically a couple times a year and saying, "Look what I've been working on." So yeah, and it's more fun. It's a more fun way to exist in New York City too, because there's a lot that happens here that's fun to be a part of. Culture is like so vibrant here that it's nice to be a part of that. So I'm rambling, but that's some background.
No.
No, that's super. I mean, I totally resonate with that because I studied studio art in my undergrad, and similar, right? I always had the interest. I was always drawing as a kid, and it was really normal for me to go into that. I came from a family of kind of professional artists, and but it was really, and even in grad school, I started as art ed and had like an elective in design, and was just like, what's happening over here, and so when you were like, you just shared about that thought of like, oh, I'm a designer. I was like, yeah, I totally that resonated with that because it not that I still like, I always love making and I love
Hmm.
that whole process and the expression, but there was definitely, I don't know, for me the design gave me a bit of maybe a focus to kind of put my energy and have a little more of a framework that, at least for me as a studio artist, I didn't really have, especially it's like a young 20 something. I just didn't have it. Yeah.
Yeah. I think the way you describe art and design and how it relates to you was really beautiful. I've never heard it put that way. Um, I don't think there's really a big difference between art and design, except for what you described. Like, when you're a designer, you have a brief and a client, but like the process is the same. But the world is giving you inputs to work from. You're still creating the thing in your special, unique way that makes you you. So I think, I don't know, this is like a really lovely conversation. just about the difference between art and design and how you can be both, but how I do think that most artists are designers, is to some extent, you know what I mean? Like without question. So,
Yeah,
yeah.
I mean, I feel like having a degree at studio art, it prepares you so well for kind of like what you're going to do when you're alone working on things, whether you're an artist
Mhm.
or designer, like how to have a conversation with the material, how to like think about the larger context of culture and like where you fit into it, how to engage with that subject matter. But I think ultimately, like we all exist in capitalism, and that means different things in different fields, and you kind of need to both find like a good philosophical fit, for how you think, but then also um, something that will make your lifestyle sustainable. And for me, I kind of just need interaction with. I start feeling shut off from the outside world very quickly if I don't, have conversations with friends or clients, or just release products into the world. See, this is why I'm always posting on Instagram, because it feels like, oh, that's like outside of my head. That's what I want to engage with.
Yeah, that makes
But
a
do
ton of
you,
sense. Yeah.
you do some fine art projects though too, right? Like installations, or am I correct?
Yeah, I mean, I
Yeah.
guess it depends on who is defining it at this point. Like, I recently had a solo show at the Center for Book Arts here in New York, but there was sort of a didactic dimension to it, and so I think a lot of times, a lot of people would call that design. It wasn't heavy-handed didactic. It wasn't like walking into a children's museum, but it was a show that is all about where letter forms come from. Like, why do we have this diversity of typography? And the
Mhm.
answer is usually some mix of culture and the technology that produce the letter forms. That's where those specific shapes come from. And that's why you can look at a letter and be like, oh, I get a medieval vibe from that, or like whatever. And so it was a show that was about, for example, there was a pixel table where I had polarization filter that you could turn and turn on and off pixels, which explained in a visceral way like how anti-aliasing works, like why this early video game fonts look kind of like blocky and stair steppy, and like why this technology of anti-aliasing was introduced to feather those things. And so, I'm playing with materials with a curiosity that is similar to an artist, but ultimately, I think within the context of that show, I think it was probably more of like a designer. But I want to work on things that are less didactic, have less of a purpose, in the future. But I made that show with the Center for Book Arts because I have a book coming out next year about typography and technology, which is like an interactive pop-up book. And so I had a lot of good material that was just like bursting out of me,
Mhm.
that I needed some kind of form. So
That's great. That's Why does art history matter?
I think what's interesting too. I mean, you had said something about studio art practice and having that studio art practice as a great preparation for really a commercial art or designer's ability to practice. The other thing I think is interesting is that you had that double masters, right?
Yeah,
A
it's
master's
crazy.
in art history. And
Mhm.
I think because I've been thinking about that a lot, and I think about the workshop that you did and the interspersed, and I'll just kind of paint the picture for Erin and for our listeners too. Like, you introduced techniques and you showed the students how to do it, and they got into it and they were making stuff and folding, and but then you would kind of dip into a presentation lecture, right, where you'd show some different studio artists, like real art history, whether it was like Calder and Bruno Minari, I think, yeah. And which I thought was great because it was giving a little more context beyond just okay, this is a craft technique. It was like no, this is a technique, but this is where it's rooted in a tradition of other artists and creative processes and thinking and just I guess the big question here is why does art history matter? And it's one of those questions I have with students all the time, especially students who are complaining, why do we got to take all these art history classes? And I try to explain why I think it's important. But it to me it seems like it's a pretty important part of your practice. And if so, yeah, why do you think it matters?
Well, I mean, I can kind of I don't want to be prescriptive and say that it matters to everyone. I think that there are some people's art practice that like really comes out of their firsthand like lived experience, and it doesn't matter as much. For me, I am really, really interested in the history of ideas. Like, I get really inspired by the history of ideas. And I find it very satisfying that things have an answer to the question of why. Like, why did it look like that? Why did someone make it like that? And like the kind of like human and emotional truths that it connects to, and like how it can like illustrate an entire era's like values and like way of thinking. There's something about that where it's something that I just really, really crave. Like we're all stuck within our bodies, in terms of experiencing the world. Like we only have these eyes to see the world through and these feet, but art, is a way of experiencing beyond. It's like having a superpower, an empathic superpower where you can experience things beyond your own self. And so I find that really compelling. And no matter what period of art history I'm studying, I can get like really, really deeply into it. But from like a practical perspective in the studio, I've never really considered myself a verbal person, and maybe I'm getting to the point where now I've like actually like written a couple of books. So I have to change that opinion of myself. But I've always felt like I could understand viscerally a lot more than I could verbally communicate. And so forcing myself to take art history to try to articulate these ideas, which were, visual ideas or sensory ideas, was something that felt important. Like I should push myself to do it. And it's paid off, like that TED Talk did did very well, and I keep on getting invited to like speak at different universities, and I'm able to teach what I do. And I've also, honestly, I feel like there's something a little bit embarrassing in admitting this, as because I think a lot of people are kind of like hard edge formalists. I find a lot of ideas when I write about what I'm doing. I figure out like what the next step is, not like in a strategic way, just getting excited about like the thing that I just made, understanding it on a deeper level. And then that just gives me a path to like go to the next project to understand what the next thing is. And sometimes people can just find the next path through making. That's great too. I don't think any one way is better than another, but I think as an artist, you just need to have these different paths for legitimate ways forward that you're excited about. And that's kind of like the oxygen that keeps you going and keeps you from saying, oh, fuck it, I'm going to go become an investment banker or whatever. So,
Right. Well, you mentioned earlier about like that idea of the conversation with materials, and then it's almost like this process you just described. It's almost like a conversation with self, right? Like working it out through making.
Well,
yeah, yeah. Oh, go ahead.
I was going to also add to that, like, just the way you talk about speaking and writing about your work. I think that's often, at least I see it a bit in our industry, where the artist kind of feels like, or the animator or the maker doesn't necessarily feel like they need those skills. And I don't think they need to have those skills perfected, but I think venturing into developing those skills makes them so much better at the actual thing as well. And whether we like it or not, we have clients, we have coworkers, we have peers that we need to communicate with, that in a non-visual way all the time. So I do think that that is a very important aspect of art and design. So it's lovely
Yeah.
to hear how you've incorporated that into your own
No,
practice.
and like the wild thing is that it's kind I found with me that it's also about communicating with myself, like getting
Mhm.
clarity. So a lot of times, I want the freedom in the studio to like not have an objective or a brief, right? Just to be able to like see like, oh, that feels cool and go with it. Because I feel like a lot of what we do as artists and designers is intuitive, that you're like
Mhm.
picking up on a vibe, you're like, what
Yeah.
is exciting to me and what feels cool, and like having faith that that will also resonate with other
Yeah.
people. But I oftentimes feel like, oh gosh, like I should have a reason, like I should, this is my career, it's important, whatever. But I found that like it's really important to like protect that, like I'm just going to follow the this is cool feelings. And then it's called post facto rationalization. Sit there afterwards and be like, okay, like why was that cool? Why is this interesting? Like,
Mm.
and in that process of like thinking things through, a great example of this was that paper record player wedding invitation project that
Yeah.
I worked on, where I was like, oh, this is really fun and I'm into it. And literally my house could have caught on fire and I would have still been pursuing that project because I was like so determined to like get it right.
Yeah.
um but yeah, like afterwards I was like, okay, I trust my feelings. Like why did I have such strong feelings about this? And I started thinking about like how, even in our time of like really really high tech things, sophisticated tech things, where we're supposed to really, that's how technology has progressed, is that things get more and more sophisticated. And so the fact that like my audience like responded in this oversized way to this very very lo-fi paper record player, I was like, oh well, this is interesting. I've stumbled upon like a dimension in our relationship with things that like modern tech doesn't get yet. And so it's kind of like my process was just kind of dumb, like this is cool, following it. But then afterwards I was like, actually, like the reason this resonates with me and resonates with other people is actually something profound, which will help us like think about our time and our things and technology. So yeah.
Now that record project, was that the piece that like launched you? Like what was the big thing, or was it a cumulative thing, like little slow baby steps to becoming like known and for
Yeah,
this?
I would say it was kind of like these inflection points, and that was
Okay.
definitely one of them. Very close, that record player project, that was a wedding invitation for my friends Mike and Karen, and I just made a documentation video of it, wrote a little bit about it in a blog post and put it on the internet, and it went like truly viral in a weird way. Like I was invited on like morning time television shows and stuff. So I just like I wasn't prepared for that because it was such an absurd object. It barely worked. It did not play music well. You could hardly even hear that it was a song, but people were really into it. And so it kind of started me thinking about paper tech and like what the appeal of lo-fi tech is, and why that's still appealing to us. So
Hmm.
that was a major moment. And then this is why paper has kind of become a theme in my work. And another thing that came out like a little bit earlier that year was this counterfeit New York Times that I worked on with the
Yeah, I
Yes
saw that on
Men.
the TED
Yeah,
Talk. Super
yeah.
cool.
So there's an activist group called the Yes Men, and they and a lot of our friends like just were gathered in my apartment for like 3 weeks piecing together this fake New York Times, which declared an end to the Iraq War, which was not over yet. You know, free tuition at all colleges, which was not a thing. Basically, all of these progressive victories that people have been fighting for came true in this newspaper. And so we made a couple 100,000 copies of those, got a ton of volunteers, and just like blanketed Manhattan with this paper.
Yeah.
Like, here's the alternate reality for today. So yeah,
I'm
I think
super
those two
curious.
projects were the beginning.
I'm super curious for that New York Times. Did the Times ever reach out to you guys about that? Or did they stay quiet?
Yeah, yeah. I mean, the Times is interesting because they're not a monolith. Like, for example, we had some. writers who wrote for the New York Times writing for our paper. So,
Oh,
so that was a thing. The New York Times, like the branding department, I guess that department was displeased with us and sent us a
okay.
cease and desist. But we had the Electronic Frontier Foundation as our lawyers, and they were
Okay, good.
like clearly in the domain of parody and is protected, and so we were kind of like welcoming a fight because it would have been good for publicity, and we felt like we were pretty protected.
Yeah.
We also didn't personally publish the paper. We made an LLC and put like $1,000 in the bank, and they published the paper just to
Smart.
give us some like legal cover, so
Layer
like
protection. Yeah.
houses were, yeah, just in case. Always
Well,
a
it's
good idea.
interesting because, yeah, I mean, the project, it's like one part parody. It's kind of one part kind of performance too, and also just like a
Yeah.
happening, which goes more into that, I guess, what we would call fine art tradition, right? Like a performance based flux is happening,
Yeah.
Yeah.
you know.
It's
Yeah,
It's
funny
just
because
like,
that was definitely a graphic design project. Like we designed a newspaper, but it is kind of like
the
more fine
use,
art than, yeah.
right?
Who
Yeah,
knows?
that's definitely fine art. And it's parody. It's almost comedy parody, like late night style, you know? It's interesting. I just often wonder, especially like when we promote projects like that, when when you have like a college student or somebody like looking to go out into the world, like we do look into legalities of things before we like put our neck on the line like that.
Yeah.
Like, so it's just a little reminder to people like you can do things, but there could be repercussions. So I'm like, it's good to hear that you guys did the thing and made the thing and put it out there, but it's also equally good to hear that you had the conversations
right.
beforehand
It
and
was thought through.
it was thought through.
Yeah. I mean, it's parody. Pro tip: it's
Yeah.
parody if you're not selling it. If you sell it, even if you
Yep.
sell it for 10 cents, it's not parody anymore because
No,
then they can make a legal claim that you're using their brand to like sell a product. So don't
exactly.
sell anything.
Smart, good tip. There's something I wanted to dig into is this idea of balancing, I guess, what I kind of thinking of as sense versus nonsense, and you talked about it a little bit, where it's especially as a designer, and I work with type all the time as a designer, right? With clients, it's type's super important. You got to communicate, and you got to be able to elegantly handle it and set it, and especially in motion, make it move in a way that's compelling. But then, like for me, I have my passion practice, right, where I do a lot of abstract typography, a lot of what we call asemic, right, non meaningful type, and experiments in that way. And I think I've shared maybe a little bit with you. I mean, Erin's seen it, a lot of the stuff I do, but it the idea that it's almost this sort of other side of having to work commercially all the time, and work with type that makes sense. And then I got this other practice where I could just, hey, it is more intuitive. It is more about just going where the feeling takes me and experiment takes me. And then what that does, you described that process when you were working on the record player, the paper record player, where you get so into it that, yeah, you everything else can kind of fade away a little bit. And I just feel like that's a really healthy spot for any, for sustainability for designers, right? Having that practice where you can get really ignited in what you're making. Yeah. Get almost a little lost in it too.
Yeah, yeah. I don't know if you all are familiar with that. There's a book, it's a biography of Robert Irwin, and it's called Seeing is Forgetting the Name of the Thing One Sees. And it's a Paul Valery quote. And Robert Irwin, I don't know. He's funny. Like some of the book is great, some of it's like kind of like iffy, but I really want to focus on that title because I think, as a visual person, there's a certain, you know, language has its limits, right? Like if you try to describe like what cilantro tastes like, you'll find that like, we all relate to language as if it's a complete interface on human experience, and it really isn't. And so like when you are a visual person, you are, you know, where you want to play is like in like color interactions, form interactions, all of these things that like are very difficult to describe verbally, and in fact you probably wouldn't, they're better experienced. But you know, when you're doing client work, it's like clients have briefs, they report to someone, you know, everything has to be translated into words. And so, you know, I think that like there is this tension and almost like this like constant warfare between like what can be described in language and what is just play. I mean, I think we call it play, and I think it's easy to diminish it, um, you know, when something's called play. But you know what you're doing is like almost like engaging with like a different language, a different set of considerations, and it's like a very serious thing. But just because of how humans work and how capitalism works, it's always going to take a backseat to those like verbal rationalization. So it's, you know,
Mm.
I think for that reason alone, it's helpful to learn how to write, learn how to communicate verbally, if it doesn't really resonate with you or relate to your practice, because then you can like just justify things and express things to clients. But yeah, it is something that I find like a constant source of frustration, but also joy, you know, is like
Yeah.
seeing that difference between like what can be described and what just has to be experienced, you know?
Yeah.
Right
It's
on.
always fun when we can say to a client, like, okay, these were the boxes you asked us to check. And, you know, we did that, but then we
Yeah.
started playing, and we realized that these experiments also check all those boxes, but they're more something, you know, it's taking it to another level. Because you got to check the boxes. Everything has like a commercial objective. Like if you can't understand the logo or hear the voiceover or read the offer, you know, we got to business objectives, you know. But um, being able to do both of those things is rare. Is very very rare. So it's nice when you can say, "Yep, we check the boxes," and still manage to also explore, experiment, and play and get to this other place. So,
Yeah, I don't know, Austin, I don't know if you have this with your client work. It's like there are like with every client project, there are zones where I'm like, okay, I'm accountable here. And then there are zones where it's like they don't even know how to talk about it, so I can do whatever I want. I just kind of like
yeah.
assume assume that like okay, how do I make this project cool? But like you were saying, Aaron, like tick all of those boxes so they can tell their
Yeah.
boss, like, yeah, it says this. There was a snowman. There was whatever, you know.
Yeah. It's almost like in spite of the their communication baseline, in spite of all that, we still were able to do our thing that makes us excited.
You know what's interesting? I find it sort of at what level I'm engaged with the client, right? So if it's very much like, okay, it's gone from a client to an agency and then it's getting to me, I'm kind of executing, right? But when I'm working direct to client, and especially if they're sort of trying to get a proof of concept internally to somebody higher up in there, I can there's a lot of freedom in those
Yeah.
Yeah.
opportunities where they're kind of coming to me and I'm interpreting what they're asking for, and then I can go and really jump in that sandbox and be like, here. And sometimes I don't have that all the time, but sometimes that happens and it's pretty fun.
That's true. The closer you are to the decision maker, the
Mhm.
final, like thumbs up person, you know, whose money it is probably.
Yeah.
um, sometimes the easier it is to get to that thing because it's less layers of filters to kind of go through before they're seeing it, and you kind of lose the CYA, cover your ass, like part
Yeah,
of the process.
that's where the conservatism sneaks in, I think.
Yeah, yeah.
I
But
think
that's
this whole top. Oh, what were we going to say, Aaron?
I was gonna say, but that's also where we like tend to show versions. Like, okay, this is safe. This
Right.
is like medium, which is usually like what we like, and then here's like the extreme edition that you're never going to go for, but hopefully that well, one, you never know, they could go for it, it's happened, but usually that medium territory is where they land. And for us, usually that's like where we want it to be when we're showing work in that pocket, because it feels out of comfort zone but not as far as that other one.
Yeah.
So
I wonder
yeah,
if you could strategically go even further than you should and like show that as like a first version and then be like back up to something where it's more
we
reasonable or whatever.
yeah, the way actually we do that, but we're very clear we're going to do that. What we'll say is we believe in the art of simplification. So, and that's about finding the sweet spot between like chaos and clarity, right?
Hmm.
So we're going to push it. We're going to do all these things, and then we're going to work with you about how much we need to remove to get it just right. And I like that process a lot. And it stops that, like, we just need more. Can you just make it extra? Can you make it more animated or something like that? And you're just like, fucking why? What does that even mean? Like, what's the,
Turn it up to
you know?
11.
Yeah, exactly. You're like, okay. But you do need to read it and you do need to, anyway. How do you maintain the feeling of play in your work?
I was going to say this topic of play. I think it's something I talk about with students a lot, and it's certainly my own practice how to maintain that feeling. And I don't know if the opposition, if it's not play work, but there's like play versus like there's just seriousness. And when there's briefs, it's like, yeah, you got to take it seriously and you got to deliver what is being and solve the problem that's being presented. But that certain attitude, I try with the students, I describe it as the creative sandbox, right? I'm like, okay, like we're going to go into that, because in that place you can make mistakes, you can try things, and
Mm-hmm.
trying to keep that attitude of, okay, I'm discovering and I'm being playful, but at the same time still doing the work, right? Yeah.
Yeah. It's interesting. When I was, kind of growing up, I was kind of seeking mentorship, and there was this person I spoke to that I like really loved the work that they produced, and they said, I won't say who it is so that they're not um, called out, but I was very intrigued, and of course I was young. I was like in my early 20s, and they said, if you want to be creative, like make stuff on your own. Like your job is to execute the vision of the agency and your client. Like it's not about being like, and I just left that meeting at one thinking like this person's insane. There's no way I'm going to have to feel like I need to work more on my own things to be creative. I work in a creative industry. Now, of course, I understand a little bit what he was saying because of the conversation we're having, but I do fundamentally disagree. I think that you can, maybe not on every single job, but certainly on most of your jobs, come to it from a place where you're going to get your creative juices flowing enough to satisfy that, like experimentation and development and all of that stuff, that you don't have to sit at a computer all weekend, that you can spend time with your family. You know what I mean? So I don't know if that resonates with you guys, but for me, I do think there is a way to like have that experimentation and also have it be a part of your work. Now that might depend on where you work and who you work with and the kind of bosses you have, but I don't think that's like a far-fetched thing to look for in, because Austin, like you get so much work in your style because of that work. You know what I mean? So
Right, right. Well, I think it's kind of like, especially with the students, right?
mhm,
I watch them get tense, and I could relate to it, but they get
yeah.
tense, right? And you could sort of see, like, I know when a student presents work, I can usually tell if they had fun when they made it, because it's
Yeah.
right there in the work, right? And I can tell when they haven't. There's a stiff, and there's a bit of a suffering that comes across in the assignment, and I'm constantly thinking about like how to motivate students to, like, yeah, do the work but stay loose and explore and try, and that there's, how do you keep that joy in the process but at the same time still do the work? Does that
Right.
make
Yeah,
sense?
I honestly I don't know how people do it who have like real jobs because I kind of I have a sketchbook full of things that I want to do, just like dream projects, little ideas, like I mean, it's everything from color combinations to like, oh, here's like a book that I want to make. And I'm just kind of waiting. I'm waiting to get an email from a client or a publisher or someone saying, like, hey, do you have any ideas for this? And then I have like
Whew.
ideas ready to go, that are kind of like their personal project ideas, like in search of some kind of
Mhm.
funding because we live in America and we don't have public funding for art and stuff. But
Yeah.
but yeah, I don't know how it works because like I am, and this is going to sound so unprofessional, and I guess it is, like I'm really incapable of doing anything that I don't enjoy doing. Like I don't really understand work. Like there has to be joy in it. And Austin, I think what you're saying is totally right. It's not just your teacher who knows that you didn't have fun. It's like everyone who looks at the final piece, if you were miserable, if you were suffering, if you weren't into it, like there's going to be something missing that's not going to have the vitality versus when you're excited about something for whatever reason. You're excited about it because, oh, I've always wanted to work for this client, or you're excited because this is exactly what you want to do with your hands this week, or you're excited about it because you're getting paid a lot. Whatever, like if that
Yeah.
excitement isn't there, then I just don't. I feel like your audience is smarter than you think they are. It's like they know, they can feel it.
Right.
I
Totally.
totally agree.
So how do you keep yourself happy is actually like a serious question, like when you're making things for other humans. I mean, even like if you I don't know if you've ever gone to see someone give a talk. You can tell whether they're enjoying themselves or whether they're freaking out or miserable, and it's the same kind of thing. It's like almost
Mhm.
doesn't matter what they're talking about. If they're enjoying themselves, then you'll enjoy yourself too. And so it
100%.
you know
Yeah, I was told like a really good tip I was given a bunch of years ago was what was this? I'll paraphrase it. It was like the quality of my presence is just as important, if not more important, than the quality of the presentation. And
Yeah.
I try because it's and I'm great, small group, classroom. Put me on a stage with lights on a pedestal. I can get like my heart starts beating fast, my face starts turning red, and I know from experience what you just said. That if I'm not having fun up there, like it's gonna be painful for the audience, right? So it almost becomes a little bit of the mission, and some of that is just public speaking, and but it's I just want to have fun. I know if I know the material, then my mission is just about having fun while I'm up there, and
Yeah.
trusting that the presentation is going to come through.
Yeah, and I think like we always talk about entitlement as a bad thing, but like I think like as a creative person, you really need to feel, and as a human, like I don't know how we got to this state, but like I don't where we have to tell people this, but you really should feel entitled to feel joy in your work.
Yeah.
And yeah, if you're not, then there's something wrong, and it's gonna catch up with you. It's gonna catch up to the work. And um, Austin, like you've been posting a lot of work that probably started out as personal experiments, right? And then you started getting hired for it. And like this is the good thing about social media and the internet. We all know about the bad things, but you can kind of like tell people what you do, and someone will pay you to do it.
Absolutely, absolutely. I was going to
Mhm.
say, Aaron, because like you could probably speak to this whole topic too, because you have spoken on really big stages in the
Mhm.
design community. Um, like I get to like kind of medium level, and I'm like, okay, I got I
Yeah.
that's that and the big stage does make me a little nervous, and both of you have really spoken on bigger platforms. So
Yeah.
yeah, what are your thoughts?
Well, I just pick one poor sucker in the audience and talk to them. And if I tell stories, so I have like an outline and I'm very aware of the time, but I I I talk to people the way I want to be talked to, and I have a lot of humor to it. I don't take myself seriously. Um, I make sure to not sugarcoat things, but to talk like real talk a little bit. And I think that helps people understand that that it's not just like, look at how great and shiny we are and everything's perfect and all of my team loved working on this. You know what I mean? Like, I think like the real key to happiness is not just the work, it's who you work with and what you work on. And for me, that's having balance in the studio, you know, and like from a hiring standpoint, from the practice of now having a company for 15 years ish, like I don't only hire on the portfolio. There's a lot that goes into just personality type and, you know, yeah, like people not taking themselves too seriously. Like ego's a real big thing that we want. Not that we don't want people to have a good sense of self, but if somebody's coming in and that's like what they're presenting forward, that's like not a good that's not a good
You
place
want
to
a
be.
team player.
Right. And even like as a creative director or director or a senior level, like actually like the higher up you get, the more you should really be talking about building other people up. Because creative directors, like it's all about being a compromise machine. I'm like helping these people, the artists kind of have their vision and a point of view and ownership over the work, and I want my clients to feel all that, and then they have clients beyond that, so giving the tools to them for how to talk about the work, to sell it through, you know. So for me, I'm just kind of the person holding the rope in the middle keeping it all together without anybody falling down on either side and still having a beautiful outcome, you know, something that I can really be proud that we created. And I think if everybody feels listened to and everybody feels like they put a piece of themselves into it and that was appreciated and they're collaborating with people they enjoy being around and there's laughter amongst them, then that's the best case scenario for a job. And that can come on a meh creative job or an amazing creative job. And you'd be surprised some of the stuff that is like so creative and everybody would be like, oh my God, I would have died to work on it. And I'm like, oh my God, you might have died if you worked on it. It was the worst. You know, like you just, you know, for me, it's, if there is a project going that way, it's not letting that show in the work. It's somehow just like, okay, just holding it all together as the lead
Always
and
be professional.
yeah, and not having it show in the work because to Austin's point, if you're a student, that's okay that that come across in the work, but in our work, it has to look effortless. Whether it's just a simple thing sliding through frame or like a really complicated CG thing, you can't see the makers in the work. You know, it's hard. What's the draw of paper for you?
All right.
Off of
All
so
right.
yeah,
Should we talk about paper now?
I think so. At
So
least
paper, yeah. Why paper? I know like you've got all this really amazing paper craft work, and even like with the risograph. I mean, it all comes back to paper. Something you said I thought was really cool was just at the workshop you did for us was the as a medium, it's everywhere. I mean, I'm just looking around my desk in my room, right? It's everywhere. Like paper is everywhere, and it's such a medium. So for you, yeah, what's the draw of paper?
Yeah, well, you know, I think I'm gonna quote Ken Yahara on paper because I feel like he makes a really good point. And I should just say that I don't know if I really what I care about is paper. So Ken Yahara, he's the design director of Muji. He has
yeah.
written a couple of books published by Lars Mueller that are really really good. And he has this essay where he talks about, you know, paper is such an interesting material, not because of its delicacy in and of itself, but because of like the sensitive like human like sensibilities that can awaken. So you know, I am really really interested in our experiences of the world that aren't like mediated through tech and like information technology.
Mhm.
And so, you know, the fact that, you can take a piece of paper, which is, as you're saying, like ubiquitous, everywhere, inexpensive, um, and
Everybody knows it. Everybody
yeah,
understands
everyone
it.
knows it. It seems very familiar, but that you can fold it, and by folding it, you program it in a way that it never
Mhm.
forgets, and you can have it tap into different functions. So, our ears, aren't sensitive enough to, like, for example, like pick up the vibrations from
Mhm.
like a record, but if you attach a cone to a needle and place it on a record, paper is like so delicate that it's able to pick up those minute vibrations. And so we did this workshop when I was at visiting Austin school, called Paper as an Interface, and I was really pushing the students to figure out, like, how can you take a piece of paper and use it to interact with some invisible force in the world around you, something that you can't access, like just with your own human hardware, but you can build like a very simple device to tap into the world around you. And so I think why paper is, it really engages like our tinkering intellectual sensibilities, uh the way that humans have evolved to think, where we like push something and we witness what happens. It's, again, like it's a way out of our own head. It's like a way of actually having like a conversation with the external world around us. And I like it because no one assumes that paper can do anything, that we're in this, for all kinds of reasons. Some of them, quite frankly, are a little bit, racist, sexist. There's a lot of isms tied up in this, but I think that we assume a lot of these like craft materials are humble and cannot
Mhm.
perform on the same level as like high tech materials. And it's just because paper's undergirded by the sophistication of the physical world, that it's really infinite, and there's an infinite amount of things you can do with it. And so I think I'm really attracted to that contrast, and I'm also really interested in kind of like um, reframing tech in terms of not like what does this thing do, but what can it do for you? Like what part of yourself does it awaken? Like how does it actually work in tandem with like how we work? So it might not always be paper for me. I might move on to a different material, but it just seems like a very interesting thing to think about at this particular moment in like tech history.
I love that. I feel like almost all crafts live in this space. To your point, like I love the fiber arts, and it's like,
Mm,
right, when does it go from like I just knit my my dog a sweater to like that's art, and and then to your point, like at what point does it become technology? Like the school I went to, RIT, they're 3D
oh,
printing.
cool. I love RT.
Um, yeah. Shout out, right? Go Tigers. But they are like 3D printing glass, like hot glass. And I'm just like, oh my
Cool.
God, what kind of applications could that have on the technology side? It's like I've heard about 3D printing clay before into these like very beautiful, art objects. But once you kind of take a step back and you're like, oh my God, this medium, this material can be manipulated like that. It's not just something that you buy at the Renaissance Festival. You know what I mean? It like becomes this other thing, to your point. And I think it's really beautiful what you've done with paper, and just to re-see something in a new way that you've been handling your whole life, that everybody's been handling their whole lives. That's magic. That's delight and wonder, because we all know what it is to hold a piece of paper, but we did not, none of us knew that we could do that with that. And so that gets me to the question of like, where did you either learn these techniques, or how would you like is it just curiosity in developing those things once you have an idea? Like I want, like Elmo, I wonder what if, let's try, if it's that simple or if it's something that you've kind of learned to be.
Yeah, I think it is kind of as simple as the Elmo. I wonder what if. But
What if,
I think
let's
it's like
try.
paired with like this almost like teenage rebellious spirit that
Hmm.
that there must be more to this, you know? Like I'm very motivated by possibility, and I think
Hmm.
that finding possibility hiding in plain view is like very appealing to me.
Yes.
That like the future, that the possibilities, that these alternate dimensions aren't elsewhere but are actually like within our
Hmm.
hands and within the materials in front of us. And I think that this is another argument for like studying history and art history, because Aaron, you mentioned like the fiber arts earlier. There's so much of how computers are set up and work today that came from weaving and came from the jackboard loom, and it came from these things
100%.
that are traditionally considered like women's work, and that whole
Right.
history has kind of been erased in a way. And so I think that people who are in like highly technical fields understand the relationship between craft and technology.
Yeah.
NASA is using like all of these like origami structures, these deployable structures, like in their spacecraft design. And so
Yeah.
they're looking back to this like thousands of year old craft discipline to create
Hmm.
things that we consider like the cutting edge of tech. And
Right.
so but I feel like just like there are these like deep biases that like keep us from thinking about like the functional, imaginative, possibility creating potential of things that we associate with like, I don't know, middle of America scrapbooking moms or something. And so I
Exactly.
Right.
think
Yeah. That made
paper
me
craft.
wonder. Yeah,
Yeah.
craft versus engineering. Like, when does craft become engineering or something else? Is that's where my mind went.
Yeah, I mean, I think for the people who are in it, like there isn't that big of a difference. I think
No.
that these labels, these labels are not helpful. The divisions aren't helpful. Most of the time they're artificial in terms of like they don't really relate to the practice or
Hmm.
references. Like during the pandemic, I for Adobe, like I interviewed one of the people at NASA who was working on Star Shield, and he was talking about like how this origami flasher form is what influenced the design of Starshield. But in order to fabricate it, they had to really study this like sartorial history of how garments were constructed. And so it's kind of like when you talk to the people actually doing the work in these high tech fields, like they know they know that this barrier is not that significant. That like whenever you're engaging material and you're thinking about how it works, what its affordances are, how to control it, you're asking the same like fundamental questions. And so
Yeah.
yeah, one of my goals and like in teaching, like I taught a lot at the School for Poetic Computation, which is sort of like this progressive like artist run school. And part of what I was tasked doing there was kind of like breaking down this wall between craft and tech, which I feel like is very useful. And it's also just useful as an artist to break down those barriers for yourself, because there's always an opportunity there, that someone else has excluded that you can exploit if people are you know um, willing to believe that these biases are the truth rather than like the actual like material truth of the thing. So
Hmm.
Well, I mean, it's, yeah, a few things. I mean, that idea of the possibility hiding in plain view, right? And then this idea of craft versus tech. But my mind went to even biomimicry, where science is looking at nature and using that to model, but almost like, I don't know if it's a craft mimicry in a way, if that's sort of when you talked about the NASA and the origami and
Hmm.
super cool. Yeah.
I just have this thing that everything's derivative. Art, technology, everything is reusing something from the past to move it forward and to re-see something in a new way. So that's the end of that statement.
Yeah. Well, I think a lot more things emerge from like the human body
Yeah.
itself than we acknowledge. When you think about like why is a fork designed this way? Like I think a lot of things come out of like real human need, whether they're physical needs or emotional
Right.
needs. So, I don't think it's necessarily a bad thing that things
Mhm.
appear derivative or related. And I think a lot of times like students like think of that as like a barrier for pursuing certain ideas. And I think that it's more a testament to the similarities from human to human than
Yeah.
anything else. But a lot of these divisions between disciplines were constructed by university systems, and I think
Mhm.
more and more we're realizing the advantage of having these like anti-disciplinary spaces where things can blend, allows different truths to emerge and be investigated. I think that there's also a usefulness. There's a reason why like scientists to science typically happens like on the science part of campus. There's a reason. Social I'm kind of rambling, but there's
Yeah.
the whole part of knowledge that's like social knowledge that you can
Mhm.
explain in words, you can package up, you can give someone your math equation and have them finish it, or your code and your GitHub and have someone finish it. And then there are things that come directly from the senses, sensory knowledge. So, how do you know things from intuition? How do you know exactly how to work with this material? How do you know how to shape the clay? How much pressure do you give? Those are all things that are like embodied knowledge that you can't package up and give to someone. You can
Right.
tell them to repeat the experience, but there's that whole tension like in universities and in formalized knowledge and with social knowledge that you know there's certain things that you can learn and know that you just can't unless you're doing it like firsthand.
Physically doing it, touching
Yeah.
it. Yeah.
So I think that like we're our brains are like these shortcut making machines where we're like, oh, okay, like this goes in this category, that's that, I don't have to think about that anymore. It's just like how our brains work. But I think it's really useful to especially as an artist to just get kind of like restless and kind of rebellious with
Messy.
those,
Yeah.
yeah, like with those classifications, and say like, okay, like what's in between these things, because that's going to be more interesting and more generative. You're going to find a lot more truth that you can own as your own, in those
Yeah.
spaces.
What are your thoughts on cross-disciplinary studies?
Well, that's always, I find that, you brought up, I like this idea of this anti-disciplinary in an educational environment. And it's something I've observed after a lot of years teaching full time in different university type environments. Departments and then colleges within a university, they get siloed, right?
Yeah.
And they get siloed for different reasons, these budgets, enrollment, personalities, whatever it might be, politics. And then you get into the industry and there's different types of siloing, but there is a lot more of a freer. You need those cross disciplines to get things done, right? And I don't know. I don't know what the answer is in the university context, but I know that when things start mixing together, it's typically more interesting and different ways of looking at things. And yeah, yeah. And maybe, yeah. What were we gonna say?
Oh, those
Well,
are
I mean,
Yeah.
oh, it definitely, I think it feels more like vital territory that hasn't been explored yet, for sure.
yeah. I
Right.
do think like universities are getting hip to this. I'm on the national council at RIT for the School of Design, and a big part of what the university is doing is exploring, um, science and technology, art, and design, and trying to kind of weave those three things together in every kind of discipline, and at least giving everybody access to those things, like encouraging, you know, somebody in the engineering department to take design classes. And because before it was very siloed, to your point, and to a certain extent it still is, but imagine if an engineer took some design classes, how their presentation skills would change. in terms of
Right.
articulating their idea and presenting their idea, in potentially meeting other students who could team up
Right.
together, and all of a
And
sudden
how
you
the
have
design students might change instead of
change.
just
Yeah,
flash, you might get a little more system thinking.
yeah.
Right.
Or
Yeah.
like, what actual problem are you solving? Because that's what designers do. We solve problems. Where engineers, they like make things, but like, is it always with like an actual real problem that's tangible? Because that's where like real innovation happens, is when all of these three things kind of happen together: science, technology, art, and design. And so I do think it is like the weaving of all of that together, where the magic happens. Like in that, yes, a piece of paper can create that kind of magic and intrigue that you're on talk shows. You know what I mean? Like, it just blows people's minds. There's a component of all of those things. You solved the problem. You created a cool invitation for your friends. There was a technological aspect, but then there was also like an art to it, and all of those things, three things woven together, created this like holy magical moment that people couldn't even believe.
Yeah. I
Right.
think that that's really that articulates well like what I'm after in my projects. Like I
Yeah.
want to reacquaint people with the magic of the world around them.
Mm.
And just kind of remind them that it's always there. It's always like
There. Yeah.
accessible to them. Yeah.
Yeah. So what do you enjoy about teaching?
Well, I enjoy just kind of like, having a speaking gig or opportunity
Hmm.
forces me to connect the dots of my own work and understand it, and gives me different ways forward. I think teaching kind of does the same thing for me, where
Hmm.
I have these, sort of like halfway developed hunches about
Okay.
all of these things that go together that are feel interesting and vital right now, and then having that pressure of like being in front of a classroom and having to present it like
Yeah.
um, really helps me. I mean, it's also like just so much fun to take whatever it is you're excited about and interested in and get like a whole lot of other people excited about it, because then it kind of becomes like a mini research group. I think a lot of times people think about teaching in this like very hierarchical way where there's like a very stark division between like who is the student, who is the teacher. But if you believe that everyone has something to offer from their
Yeah.
unique perspective in life, which you should because it's true,
It's
then,
true. Yeah.
kind of, giving the students the basic tools to play around with what you're thinking about and seeing how they explore and where they go can be really useful to your own practice as well. I feel like my paper engineering students have definitely discovered new things that, I never dreamed of. And so it's kind of, I feel like getting perfecting the art of teaching for me is kind of like it's kind of like that balancing act between like how much information to give them, what to withhold, so that they could run with it and like really make it their own and like keep exploring. So
Yeah. So you give workshops. How do you structure them? What would that be like?
It kind of depends on what type of workshop it is. Like this
Okay.
weekend, my friend Keegan, who co-runs this community printmaking space that I work at, we're doing a Rezo animation workshop, and this is a very fast-paced thing. So it's Saturday, it's Sunday, and on Saturday we take a whole bunch of different types of animation. People will just show up with like videos from their iPhone, and then some people have been working, on Cinema 4D for weeks to create a perfect animation. And so we take those animations, we break them up into frames, we automate them onto a contact sheet that's 11 by 17 that we can print out on the Rezo. We do color separations, and then Keegan and I like basically stay up all night printing these things so that we can stitch them back together on Sunday. Um, so yeah, I mean, I like to structure workshops that way where we get something done that the students can feel like ownership in and proud of. But um, Austin was mentioning that like there's usually these little bits of like historical context or philosophical context, just to give people like more angles to explore and connect with the subject matter. And we're not going to really have time for that this weekend, but I do kind of like float that idea of like, hey, it's fun to misuse technology. You can find new techniques by misusing technology, but then we kind of
Mhm.
go straight into like, what is a rezo and why should you use it for animation? So, um,
Um, that's great. That's awesome. That's like a little bit of a shout out. I would totally take that workshop.
it's fun. Yeah, we do it every month
Oh, do
because
you?
yeah, and it's really, I mean, it's great too, like because you don't have to have a Rezo to continue using the technique. You can kind of buy like a crummy inkjet printer and just print one color at a time and layer it on there, and you get a very similar effect to
Result.
Rezo. But
Okay.
it's also like, I don't know, if students are thinking about like using printers and then scanning the back end to make an animation, like there's a lot of different things you can do with like, drawing or painting on top of those animation frames.
Yeah.
Somehow like getting it out of the computer and into the physical world has been like pretty generative for animation students to just think about like, okay, like how do I mess this up and like go back and forth between like the digital realm and the physical realm, like what strengths, because I mean, After Effects is amazing. Like a lot of these programs just give you this like real precision control over, the tween of your animation, like how things like slow down, come to a stop. I don't know. And that is delicious. But a lot of times it comes off as a little bit cold.
Yeah.
And so, if you bring it out into like some printed process, then you get that like nice visceral grain paired with that computer precision, which is usually what I'm after, is some combination of those things. Like
Yeah.
computers aren't good at making noise and
Yeah.
computers aren't good at making drop shadows. So
What are your thoughts on analog versus digital? Yeah.
No, that's definitely one of the topics too that I think we wanted to dig into is this whole the analog digital mashup, right? And I think even going back to the topic about paper, like there's the tactility, there's
Mhm.
just sensibilities and why that appeals to viewers and designers too. And I know there was a big movement. I kind of observed it with tech brands, whether it was Facebook or Instagram or Google, all of them, that they were utilizing, because they're essentially digital products. But for a lot of years, they were doing a lot of real tactile presentations of their branding as a technique of softening and humanizing their look.
mhm.
Yeah.
Yeah, you seem really comfortable working between the two, and I mean, you already spoke a little bit to some of the strengths and weaknesses of analog versus digital. But yeah, yeah,
Yeah.
super cool.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, I mean, I feel like, when you jump back and forth, like you can achieve effects that aren't possible in either. And, I was complaining about like, computers aren't good at drop shadows, computers aren't good at noise. I mean, but it's kind of like whatever you aesthetically respond to. There might be things that in your digital process, you're like, oh yeah, that's what I want. Like I want
Mhm.
perfect Bezier curves for whatever. Um, but you might not like the texture, the way the light hits it, or there is no light on computers. Yeah, so
Yeah.
that is a good case for taking that design and outputting it to a laser cutter or paper cutter, so you can get something that is like a physical object. But
Yeah.
I there's this great quote that I love by this 19th century physicist named Hermann von Helmholtz. He says that, everything as humans is an event on the skin. So, if you read something in a book, you think, oh, I'm reading information, but like really those are light photons hitting your retina. Every time someone tells you a fact, that's like wobbly air hitting your eardrum.
Mhm.
And so I think like in the information age, it's very tempting to think about everything in this like flattened, it's information and like the delivery mechanism doesn't matter. But I think it's something we really viscerally crave. And the pandemic kind of like put a fine point on this because we're like, oh yeah, we're going to a party, we're going to a dance party, we're going to drink cocktails with our friends, but somehow that like 2D on the screen experience like isn't the same thing, and you're all of a sudden aware of, you know, all of those like sensory things you're missing out. And I think a lot of my experience in working with computers and working digitally, even though like I'm an early adopter of like most technologies, is that like it feels almost like a large part of like my sensory experience is just cut off. The There's this writer named Brett Victor. He designed the touch gestures on iPhone, so he's been like
Oh,
a
cool.
really he's an engineer who's like a really great proponent of like, hey, humans are sensory creatures, like maybe appeal to them on multiple dimensions. But he has this whole talk where he likens our experience using computers to almost like a dog that's like in like this kennel box that isn't like really allowed to completely experience life.
Um,
And so I think that, you know, kind of like we were talking about like language as an interface, like computers are definitely an interface on experience, and you know they pretend to be comprehensive, they definitely aren't. And so I feel like a good way to break out of that is just to start making things that appeal on like multiple sensory dimensions. So even, you know, when I'm working on like a stop motion animation, like even though it's always going to be like trapped behind glass on a screen, like how can I get the viewer's like sense of touch involved? You know, how can I like connect to their memories of like, you know, manipulating small things or whatever? So I think just like kind of like recognizing that and figuring out like how to work with that in your own work. And it doesn't have to be like, oh, you know, you might be completely satisfied with how drop shadows look like on computers, but like whatever it is that you're dissatisfied, you know, that's how you find your aesthetic, right? It's kind of like, I'm dissatisfied and discontent with, you know, this thing. How do you solve for that? And a lot of times, you know, if you just go back, um, you know, flip between analog and digital, you'll find a solution in the other
Right.
realm to that problem, you
mhm.
know?
Yeah, I've been fascinated by that, the phenomena that, you know, if I scan a text or a photograph, a really, you know, active texture, and then I composite it in my, you know, Photoshop and my design frame, that there's, without somebody actually touching it, just looking at it, that it can produce that experience of the tactility and just how to push that. And
Yeah.
yeah, yeah,
What projects are next for you?
super cool.
Okay. So, I mean, I don't want to take up too much more of your time, but I am very curious about what some goals you might have, or what's next, or what's, you know, coming projects that you're excited about that you can talk about.
Yeah, yeah, I know. I just like worked on this like pop-up book for Apple, which will never see the light of day. It's like an
Oh,
internal thing, which I'm so disappointed because it was like really cool. So I can't really talk about that, but it exists.
no
And
way.
if you're at Apple, then I hope you enjoy it. Um, but I've been working with Letterform Archive, which is a graphic design archive in San Francisco. Been working with them since 2019 on this pop-up book that is about typography. And just like how you go when you go to art history class, you learn about, you know, why artists were doing things in different time periods. This kind of brings that same level of sensibility to typefaces. So, you know, when you see a typeface that looks like this, like why does it look like that? You know, where did that come from? And type is amazing to me just from like the level of human perception because it's so small and letters are so similar. You know, like a script A isn't that different than like, you know, a chiseled Roman A, but we get these transported to completely different places and
Mhm.
times when we look at them. And so like how does that much like vibe like fit into these teeny tiny shapes, is kind of the question. And so it's an interactive book that like really dives into the history of letter forms. Where did they come from? How are they made? And it's been a really big project. You know, we've been working on it for 4 years now, and so
A
that's
long time.
supposedly coming out next year. So that's the main thing.
Who are your favorite artists?
I had one other question going back
Okay.
to art history, which was, do you have favorite artists or movements?
Um, yeah, I mean, I think like a lot of designers, I'm really into the Bauhaus, and especially like what we were talking about, like the mixing of like science and craft, and making. Um, so that period's definitely interesting to me. I am super interested in perception and the way that art and design experiences can essentially like hold up a mirror to our own perception and make us aware of
Yeah.
how our vision works. And so Olafur Eliasson is an artist that's really interesting to me. Hans Hake is really interesting to me. And these are artists that also work with scientists and physicists to figure out different sort of like probe at like different mysteries of our
Mhm.
senses, and then take that and turn it into like an experience where you feel like, oh, I'm not only engaging with the art, but I'm learning something about like how physics works, how I matter, how
Yeah.
how how I work. Also Talba Auerbach, I really love. She's another one who she's kind of in between fine art and design, and does really really interesting work about perception. And so yeah, I think those are some of my favorites. But I really like most art. Like I am very easy to please. You can take me to any museum anywhere in the world and I will be happy. It doesn't matter if it's like 19th century art or like modern art. I think I'm most comfortable in with modern art because it is in such close dialogue with like physics and science and like contemporary philosophies that like frame our understanding of reality. But
Mhm.
I can get lost in like a Monet painting. Like I just really really love art.
That's amazing. I very rarely am in a conversation with somebody where I'm like, wow, I have to look all of these people up. You know what
Oh.
I mean? It's so great though, because like, I think maybe what some students don't understand or younger people is that these are references. These are references by which we can talk and state opinions and ideas and thoughts. So it is really important to have like a shared understanding, a shared knowledge. And that's why I think art history is important. So it's if this weren't being recorded, I would be jotting everything down like a maniac.
Oh yeah. Actually, this is kind of handy. Like tonight, there's a show called Art 21. I don't know if you all have seen it. It's like a PBS series where they feature
Cool.
different artists. And so Tauba is on the one that's coming out tonight. And
So cool.
Annika Yee, another really, really great artist. She recently had like a big solo show at the Tate where she created all of these like little plastic floating jellyfish like things. She
Oh, I
does
know her work. I didn't connect it together. Yeah.
yeah,
Yeah,
yeah.
it's
So, yeah, they both do amazing work. So I'm very excited about it. I love Art 21, but I'm particularly excited about this Art 21. And if you haven't watched the Netflix series Abstract, I would recommend
Oh, I
watching
have
that
watched.
too.
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
Yeah, they have one
Absolutely.
about Olafur Eliasson, and that one's
Yeah.
really good.
Okay. It's so interesting. I'm not great with names, but as soon as I see the thing, like I'm like, oh yeah, 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 that guy. I know that guy. That
Yeah,
gal.
yeah,
Yeah,
totally.
that's funny. Awesome.
Cool. All right. So thank you so
So
much.
much.
Aw,
Yeah.
thank you all. This was
It was so
fun.
lovely to get to know you a little bit. I
Aw.
will come out and take a workshop, probably
Oh
in
my
the
gosh,
fall,
yeah. We
late
actually do
fall.
it over Zoom, so people from all over the world
Oh,
join.
really? You do it over Zoom?
We do it over Zoom because, like, I mean, this is going to make people sad who are dreaming about leaving their tech jobs. Like, most of what you do on the Rezo is actually, like, done on the computer. And so, it's 3 hours of, like, file prep. It's fun,
Okay.
but, then we go and print them, and then we scan them back in. And so everything's online. We mail the contact sheets to people. So you get
Okay.
an
Well, then
artifact.
maybe sooner. Yeah, maybe August.
Yeah.
That's great. Okay, well, we always do our peace sign off.
Thank you,
Thank
Kelly.
you.
Thanks for having me.
Thanks for listening. We'll see you on the next Between the Keyframes.